not to misuse that strength. He is slow to speak because he is a deep and thoughtful person.
What if I told you that stupidity isn't just the absence of intelligence, but something far more insidious? A force that can transform brilliant minds into instruments of destruction. What if the greatest threat to civilization isn't evil people doing evil things, but ordinary people who've simply stopped thinking? Picture this. A renowned scientist with multiple degrees suddenly starts believing and spreading dangerous misinformation. A compassionate teacher begins endorsing harmful ideologies. A loving parent starts making decisions that endanger their own children. These aren't evil people. They're intelligent, well-meaning individuals who've fallen victim to what Dietrich Bonhoeffer called the power of stupidity. And here's what makes this truly terrifying. It's not happening to other people. It's happening to people just like you and me. This isn't just philosophical speculation. In 1961, Stanley Milgram conducted his infamous obedience experiments at Yale University. Ordinary volunteers were instructed by an authority figure to administer what they believed were increasingly painful electric shocks to another person. Despite hearing screams of agony, 65% of participants delivered shocks they thought to be lethal. These weren't sadists or mentally ill. They were normal people who had temporarily surrendered their capacity for independent moral judgment. This is exactly what Bonhoeffer witnessed firsthand in Nazi Germany, and it led him to develop one of the most unsettling theories about human nature ever conceived. But before we dive deeper, I have to ask, have you ever found yourself believing something simply because everyone around you believed it too? Keep that question in mind as we explore what might be one of the most important psychological insights of the modern era. Dietrich Bonhoeffer wasn't your typical philosopher sitting in an ivory tower, pondering abstract ideas. He was a German Lutheran pastor who watched his entire society transform before his eyes. Born in 1906 into an intellectual family, his father was a prominent psychiatrist and neurologist. Bonhoeffer had every reason to believe in the power of education and rational discourse. But as the Nazi Party rose to power, Bonhoeffer witnessed something that shattered his faith in human rationality. He watched as his fellow Germans, educated, cultured, religious people, began supporting policies and leaders that contradicted everything they claimed to believe. These weren't ignorant masses being manipulated by clever propaganda. These were professors, doctors, clergy members, and intellectuals who were actively participating in their own intellectual surrender. In his prison cell in 1943, waiting to be executed for his role in the plot to assassinate Hitler, Bonhoeffer wrote what would become his most popular proclamation. Against stupidity, we are defenseless. Neither protests nor the use of force accomplish anything here. Reasons fall on deaf ears. What made this observation so chilling wasn't just its context, but its precision. Evil, he noted, always carries within itself the germ of its own subversion. It creates unease, resistance, eventual breakdown. But stupidity believes it's doing good, making it absolutely immune to correction. Perhaps Bonhoeffer's most crafty insight was about how stupidity serves existing power structures. Malicious people know they're doing right. It creates internal conflict and eventual breakdown. But people caught in functional stupidity believe they're doing good, making them absolutely resistant to correction. This isn't accidental.
Tremble before fast!
To suppress information anymore. Information honestly becomes prohibitively difficult. Bonhoeffer used the word stupidity. He wasn't talking about low IQ or lack of education. He was describing something far more complex, what we might call functional stupidity or willful ignorance. In his letters from prison, he explained, The fact that the stupid person is often stubborn must not blind us to the fact that he is not independent. In conversation with him, one virtually feels that one is dealing not at all with him as a person, but with slogans, catchphrases, and the like that have taken possession of him. Here's what made Bonhoeffer's theory so revolutionary. He argued that stupidity often emerges not from individuals but from independent is both difficult and costly. The truth is, our economic systems
I am ready to put on a show!
News outlets get more clicks with outrage than nuance. Politicians win elections with simple slogans rather than complex policy proposals. When people are working multiple jobs, drowning in debt, constantly bombarded with information, intellectual surrender becomes a survival strategy. What economists call rational ignorance emerges. It becomes more efficient for individuals to remain uninformed about complex issues than to invest time and energy required to genuine understanding. But this individual rationality creates collective irrationality, exactly the dynamic Bonhoeffer observed in Nazi Germany. The result isn't just individual choice, but structural pressure toward intellectual surrender, and our brains, stressed and overwhelmed, are perfectly designed to comply. While economic systems push us toward intellectual shortcuts, our brains are actually wired to comply. Leon Festinger's groundbreaking research on cognitive dissonance in the 1950s showed exactly how this works psychologically. When people encounter information that contradicts their beliefs, their brains fight to reject it. Here's what Bonhoeffer understood that modern psychology this process is amplified when people are stressed, or economically insecure, exactly the conditions our current systems create. Bonhoeffer observed that stupidity often emerges in group settings, writing, "It becomes clear that stupidity is not a psychological problem, but a sociological one." He noticed that perfectly rational individuals would abandon their critical thinking abilities when they became part of a larger group or movement. This insight was decades ahead of its time. Solomon Asch's conformity experiments in the 1950s demonstrated exactly what Bonhoeffer had witnessed. When surrounded by a group with obviously wrong answers, 75% of people will go along with the crowd at least once, even when they know the group is wrong. Imagine how this plays out in digital age. Social media algorithms create echo chambers that make this transformation easier than ever. A 2018 study from MIT researchers found that false information spreads 6 times faster than true information on social platforms. But here's the crucial insight. Because false information often feels more emotionally satisfying than complex truth.
There's still a chance to stop
When
them!
someone shares misinformation that confirms their worldview, they're participating in a system that rewards intellectual shortcuts over careful analysis. The algorithm feeds them more of the same, creating echo chambers that act like intellectual quicksand. Have you ever noticed how your social media feed seems to show you exactly what you want to see? That's not an accident. It's the architecture of chosen ignorance.
Tremble before
You see this pattern play out repeatedly throughout history. The Salem witch trials weren't conducted by evil people, but by God-fearing community members who genuinely believed they were protecting their neighbors.
You need
The Red
to teach me
Scare
that
of the
spell.
1950s wasn't driven by malicious actors, but by patriotic Americans who sincerely thought they were defending democracy. And in critical thinking in favor of group
You need to
consensus
teach
and
me that
emotional
spell.
certainty. If our brains and systems are rigged against us, how do we fight back? Bonhoeffer believed that breaking free from stupidity overcomes costly grace, the willingness to think independently even when it's painful, or dangerous. Now we understand we're not just fighting social pressure. We're fighting millions of years of evolution and billion-dollar algorithms designed to exploit our mental shortcuts. On an individual level, we can cultivate what psychologists call intellectual humility. The recognition that our
I am ready to put on a show!
this means information that contradicts our beliefs, not to torture ourselves, but to test whether our beliefs are worth holding. Here are some concrete practices that can serve as your daily resistance against intellectual surrender. First, practice intellectual friction. Set aside time each week to read thoughtful arguments from people who disagree with you, not to change your mind necessarily. Patience can withstand scrutiny. Second, embrace productive ignorance. When you find yourself absolutely certain of something, ask what evidence would change your mind. If you can't think of it, that's a red flag. Third, slow down and share. Before posting anything online, take 60 seconds to verify it from an independent source. That brief pause can break the algorithmic cycle that feeds on our emotional reactions. Finally, practice saying, "I don't know," when you actually don't know something. In a world that rewards confident ignorance over humble uncertainty, admitting gaps in your knowledge becomes a radical act. But individual practices aren't enough. We also need structural changes that make intellectual honesty easier and more rewarding. This means requiring social media platforms to disclose their algorithmic biases and how they curate content. It means funding comprehensive public media literacy
Tremble before fast!
It means designing modern platforms that reward intellectual humility over tribal certainty. Most importantly, we need honesty, use stress, and uncertainty that make people vulnerable to intellectual shortcuts.
My work here is
When people aren't
Only 60
constantly worried
seconds
about
left.
healthcare, housing, and employment, they have more mental bandwidth
give them
for
another
careful thinking
inch,
about
or
complex
else.
issues. Bonhoeffer's theory was brilliant for its time, but here's what he couldn't have done. This isn't just about moral surrender or social pressure. Modern neuroscience reveals something far more unsettling. Our brains are literally wired to fall into functional stupidity.
30 seconds!
Think about it. Bonhoeffer witnessed Nazi propaganda spreading through newspapers and radio broadcasts, but we're living through something exponentially more dangerous. We've gone from Nazi propaganda to social media algorithms that know exactly which psychological reactions to poke. The threat isn't just escalating, it's targeting the very architecture of humankind. This isn't just about Nazis or propaganda, it's about the wiring of your brain. Our minds evolved to prioritize speed over accuracy, to trust familiar sources over unfamiliar ones, and to seek information that confirms what we already believe. These were survival features that helped our ancestors make quick decisions when hesitation meant death. The scariest part? We're all vulnerable, no matter how smart we think we are. The mechanism is exactly what Bonhoeffer described. When people feel
Pick your
threatened
hero,
and uncertain,
or
they become
villain,
more
I'm not
susceptible
judging.
to authoritative-sounding explanations that reduce complexity to simple narratives.
But it does help.
But here's the crucial insight that makes Bonhoeffer's warning more urgent than ever. We're not just dealing with human manipulation anymore. We're facing systems designed by artificial intelligence to exploit our cognitive vulnerabilities with surgical precision. Every click, every pause, every emotional reaction is being analyzed and weaponized against our capacity for independent thought. We saw this play out in real
I've
time
made my
during
share of
COVID-19.
mistakes.
Doctors,
And I am fighting
engineers,
every
and
day to
lawyers,
make amends.
people with demonstrated analytical abilities, began
30
sharing
seconds before you
debunked
attack.
theories
Get
about
ready.
vaccines and treatments. These weren't failures of
I
intelligence.
need you to promise
They were
me you'll show
failures
some
of
restraint out there,
intellectual
Johnny.
independence
What's
under
the problem, sis?
unprecedented pressure.
Afraid to turn up the heat?
Not at all. But in most realities, these are some of our
Bonhoeffer paid
closest
the
allies.
ultimate price for refusing to surrender his intellectual independence. He was executed by hanging on April 9th,
The battle
1945,
starts in
just
5,
weeks before
4,
Germany's surrender.
3.
His last words, according to a fellow prisoner, were,
All you need to do is
"This
capture
is
the
the
mission
end.
area. Got
For
it?
me, the beginning of life."
What are they like? These
His sacrifice
other
wasn't
worlds
just
where
about
I do
political
not
resistance.
exist.
It was about defending the very possibility of human thought. He understood that when people stop thinking independently, they stop being fully human.
Foes are found us.
They become, in his words, puppets, whose strings are pulled by whatever force
Anyone
happens
willing to
to be
help?
strongest at the moment. Here's what makes Bonhoeffer's final challenge so relevant
Mission
today.
area is yours to capture now.
Fast.
From behind.
When the pressure to conform is overwhelming, when thinking independently requires courage, when the cost of truth is higher than the price of individual lives, who stands fast? The answer isn't found in superior intelligence or education. It's found in the daily choice to remain curious rather than certain, to seek truth rather than comfort, to think carefully rather than react quickly. These aren't heroic acts. They're ordinary practices that become extraordinary when everyone around you has stopped doing them. The tragedy is that intellectual surrender often feels like liberation.
I want to make
Thinking is hard work.
you like
It's
that.
uncomfortable to hold complex, contradictory ideas in your mind simultaneously. It's painful to admit you might be wrong about something important. But Bonhoeffer argued that this discomfort is the price of remaining human. In a world that profits from our intellectual surrender, choosing to think for ourselves becomes a radical act. This brings us to perhaps the most uncomfortable truth of all.
Ah, that's better.
We're all susceptible to functional stupidity. The moment we think we're
You've
immune,
captured more than
we've
half
already
of the
begun to
mission area.
succumb.
Keep going.
The price of intellectual freedom is eternal vigilance. Not against external enemies, but against our own tendency to stop thinking when thinking becomes difficult.
Chaos always prevails.
Bonhoeffer's theory of stupidity is unsettling precisely because it's so accurate. We see it every day. Intelligent people believing obviously false things. Educated individuals making catastrophically bad decisions. Well-meaning citizens supporting policies that contradict their own values. The problem isn't that people are getting less intelligent. It's that our systems increasingly reward intelligence
My bad, y'all.
over careful thinking. But within this sobering diagnosis lies genuine hope. If stupidity is partly chosen, it can also be rejected. If it's partly structural, structures can change. As a result of cognitive overwhelm, we can create conditions that make thinking easier. Think of critical thinking as physical exercise. It's uncomfortable at first, but essential for strength. Just as we wouldn't expect to run a marathon without training, we can't expect to navigate complex information without practicing intellectual discipline. The mental muscles required for independent thought need regular use, or they atrophy. The next time you find yourself absolutely certain about something,
I may be
the next time you
powered
find
by
yourself
chaos.
dismissing contradictory evidence without consideration, the next time you feel the comfort of having all the answers, remember Bonhoeffer's warning. Functional stupidity doesn't announce itself with fanfare. It
30
whispers
seconds
that you
before you
already know
attack.
everything
Get
you
ready.
need to know. And in that moment of recognition, you have a
Ilyana,
choice.
dear,
Will you
remember,
surrender
you're
your
more than
mind
welcome
for the
in
comfort of
sanctorum.
certainty, or will
Aren't
you
you worried
choose
about
the more
my dark
difficult
side
path of
anymore,
intellectual
Stephen?
independence?
I am, but
The
books
question
and
Bonhoeffer
TV
leaves
will
us
teach you
with
how to
isn't
think.
whether we're smart enough to
They
avoid
worked for him.
stupidity. It's whether we're committed enough to keep thinking when thinking becomes inconvenient,
starts in 5,
uncomfortable, or
4,
costly.
3.
In a world that
2,
profits from our
1.
intellectual surrender,
All you
choosing
need
to
to do is
think
capture the mission
carefully and
area.
independently
Got
becomes one of the most important things we can do. Here's my challenge to you. This week, find one belief you hold strongly and spend 30 minutes researching the best arguments against it.
I'm clocking some
Not to
bad
torture
guys.
yourself,
Behold,
not to become
that
paralyzed
child!
by doubt, but to practice the kind of intellectual courage Bonhoeffer died defending. Your belief survives the scrutiny, you hold it more
Mission
confidently.
area is yours to
If it
capture
doesn't,
now.
you'll have learned something valuable about the difference between conviction and
Judge, jury, and
future just depends on how we collectively answer Bonhoeffer's challenge. If this video has made you question something you thought you knew for certain, that's not a weakness. It's the beginning of intellectual courage.
I will leave this
Share this
universe a
video
better
with someone who
place than
isn't
it
afraid to
was
think
before
deeply,
I was
even when it's
created.
uncomfortable. Because in a world designed to profit from our intellectual surrender, the simple act of thinking carefully becomes the most important form of resistance we have. And here's what I want you to remember. Every time you choose curiosity over certainty, evidence over emotion, careful thinking over quick reactions, you're not just protecting your own mind. You're defending the very possibility of human wisdom in an age of artificial stupidity. What's one belief you're willing to question this week? Let me know in the comments. And let's commit to being the kind of people who stand fast when everyone else is stop thinking.
Stay at the spa. No! You are not alone. I feel better already. You are safe now, my friend. Healing power. Bless the healing arts. The soul cannot truly be extinguished. Some assistance, please. Feel my power.
Behold the god of thunder!
Control lost.
Oh, there's the car. 1, 2, 3, 4.
We are undefeatable.
Born again! Judge, jury, executioner! Born again!
Double KO.
Behold the god of thunder!
Anyone willing to help?
Healing power.
Just in time. Control C.
I require some aid.
You captured more than half of the mission area. Keep going.
Hiding all that junk. This guy's only 17. He's not supposed to be in the country, but this next guy, this white charger right here, he really wants to make sure he escapes.
Cosmic
Challenge her.
That's much better. We are undefeatable.
This guy's rolling light. So dangerous. Everybody at risk.
Double KO.
Look at him. He's moving this guy right here. He thinks he can get away. That car's fast. There's my
You're doing better than they are.
Judge,
together.
Oh, he just crashed. Hit the wall. Doors open.
You'll have to keep fighting until you have a winner.
Are they gonna pit him?
I require some aid.
Sounds like it's turning into Princess.
Quantum match.
born again! The god of thunder!
This guy just keeps making left turns. You can't even see. That is so dangerous. Flowing stop signs. You can't
Another
see.
epic
Everyone's in
victory.
there. Gotta get
Big win.
Ooh, somebody just hit something. There he is. Ooh, they're tasing him. I gotta mute the volume here. Wow. He had 4 people. people in the car, put the entire neighborhood at risk. But as you're about
Pick
to
your
see, some
hero.
of the
Or
smugglers,
villain.
Texas
I'm not
DGS
judging.
encounters
You don't
think
have to
they're
be a
smarter than
witch
the
to find
police.
the
Check this
magic
out.
in
This
this world.
Cadillac right here
But
is
it
getting
does
pulled
help.
over. They noticed something suspicious with the vehicle, decided to stop them.
What if the people who are least suited to lead are precisely the ones most likely to attain leadership positions?
I have
Imagine
made my
walking
share
into a
of
boardroom or
mistakes.
government chamber
I am
and realizing
fighting
that the
every day
person
to
with the
make
most
it.
power is the one who perhaps deserves it the
30
least.
seconds before you attack.
Could our social
Get
systems
ready.
be fundamentally flawed in how they select leaders? Look around you. In politics, business, and institutions around the world, we see the same pattern repeating.
You are one to talk,
Look at Richard
Venom.
Nixon, who reached the pinnacle of American power only to abuse it during the Watergate scandal. Despite his intelligence and experience,
Somehow you just made me
Nixon's
want to save the
paranoia,
universe.
deception,
battle
and
starts
moral
in 5,
compromises led to his
4,
downfall.
3, 2,
Yet these same
1.
traits, his ruthless
All you need to do is
pragmatism
capture the
and
mission
willingness to
area.
bend
Got
rules, helped him climb the political
If I
ladder
could get
in
a
the
look at
first
Doom's
place.
machine, I could solve this problem by
Nearly
lunchtime.
500 years ago, Niccolo Machiavelli observed this same pattern in Renaissance Italy. In his controversial masterpiece, The Prince, he wrote, "Men judge generally more by the eye than by the hand, because it belongs to everybody to see you, to few to come in touch with you. Everyone sees what you appear to be. You really know
Mission
what you
area
are."
is yours to capture
In
now.
other words, appearance trumps reality when it comes to leadership. Machiavelli wasn't advocating for deception. He was describing an uncomfortable truth about human psychology and power
nice deep
dynamics that
freeze.
modern research has confirmed. Research in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology found that overconfident individuals are often perceived as more competent, even when their actual abilities don't justify their perception. Today, we're going to explore why our leadership systems consistently reward traits that should disqualify candidates. Narcissism, dishonesty, and even bullying.
That's 3.
We'll examine how Machiavelli's insights from the
Goodbye.
16th century align with what psychological research now confirms about human behavior and power structures.
That's better.
But we'll also look at exceptions, leaders and organizations that have managed to break this pattern, and what we can learn from them. Students must consider how to avoid those things which make him hated or contemptible. It makes him contemptible to be considered fickle, frivolous, effeminate, mean-spirited, irresolute.
Don't mess with the amazing Spider-Man!
Half of the mission area. Keep going.
When Machiavelli wrote these words, he was acknowledging something profound about leadership positions. They reward those who project unwavering confidence and decisiveness. In contemporary terms, these narcissistic individuals often have a significant advantage in leadership competitions. Think of it like this. Imagine you're lost in the woods with a group of strangers. Two people step forward offering to lead. One says, "I think I know the way, but I'm not entirely sure. There are several possible paths to take." The other declares, "I know exactly where to go. Follow me without question." Even though the first the second person. Have you noticed this pattern play out in your own players? That instant expectation towards certainty, even your uncertainty might be more honest. A comprehensive meta-analysis published in Personal Psychology examined 54 studies on the relationship between narcissism and leadership. Traits that help narcissists get selected for leadership roles. Supreme confidence, charismatic self-determination, and bold visions aren't necessarily the same traits that make for effective leadership once selected. In fact, companies led by narcissistic CEOs experience 27% more volatility in performance and over 33% more likely to facing negative market reactions to their strategic decisions. Consider former WeWork CEO Adam Neumann. who convinced investors to value his office-sharing startup at $47 billion despite massive losses. His grandiose vision and
The
unwavering
multiverse offers
self-confidence
endless
helped him raise
possibilities,
billions
but
while
only
presenting
if it
himself as a
survives this
world-changing visionary. But these same traits eventually contributed to his company's dramatic downfall, with WeWork's
30
valuation
seconds
plummeting
before you
by more than
attack. Get
80%
ready.
when reality couldn't match his grandiose promises.
Well, look at
The
you.
psychology behind
Are
this
you a
phenomenon
superhero?
is straightforward.
What can you do?
We're naturally drawn to confidence, especially
Okay,
in uncertain
I'll let you show
situations.
me.
Research
what Hydra
shows
did to
that
me,
individuals
this fight got a
displaying
lot more
confidence,
personal.
even when wrong, gain higher social status than those expressing uncertainty.
The
As
battle
one
starts in
psychologist
5,
put it, we
4,
prefer confidence
3,
to accuracy.
2, 1.
Machiavelli recognized this
All
when
you
he
need to
noted
do is
that
capture the mission
nothing
area.
makes a prince
Got it?
so much esteemed as great
Ancient
enterprises
magic
and setting a fine
permeates this
example.
realm. I
The
could get
appearance of
used to it
greatness
here.
often matters more than actual
Now, a
competence.
disappearing act.
Yet there are notable exceptions to this pattern.
Enemies on approach.
Consider former
Got one in my
Botswana
sights.
President Seretse Khama, who led his country from one of Africa's poorest nations to one of its most stable and prosperous democracies. Unlike many post-colonial African
The
leaders
mission
who
area
cultivate
is yours to
personality
capture
traits,
now.
Khama governed with humility and pragmatism,
One hurts.
establishing strong institutions rather than consolidating personal power. Under his leadership, Botswana's GDP grew from $69 million in 1960 to over $8.4 billion by 2000, while life expectancy increased from 52 to 65 years. His leadership demonstrates that while narcissism might provide advantages in attaining power, steadiness, integrity, and genuine concern for citizen welfare can create more lasting leadership legacies. When you reflect on leaders who truly transform their organizations or communities, you notice this distinction between the traits that help someone gain power versus those that help them use it effectively. Everyone forgets how crazy it is in the
Don't mess with the amazing spider!
who have done great things, considered each of their word of little account, and have known how to beguile one's mind through shrewdness and cunning. This is perhaps Machiavelli's most infamous observation, that successful leaders often employ deception.
Be right there.
Modern readers are often shocked by his apparent endorsement of lying,
Waypoint.
but Machiavelli wasn't advocating for dishonesty as a moral good. He was
Assemble!
making an empirical observation about what tactics tend to succeed in power struggles. Effective deception in leadership isn't usually about blatant lies. Instead, it's more like a magician's
This is real firepower!
Imagine watching a card trick. While your portrait from the magician's right hand waving dramatically, his left hand is quietly doing work.
Judge! Jury!
Political and corporate leaders use similar tactics, drawing attention to favorable methods while quietly hiding unfavorable ones. When you think about leaders you've encountered, how often have they directed your attention to what they want you to see rather than what you need to see? The psychology behind why this works is fascinating. Humans suffer from what behavioral economists call optimism bias. We tend to interpret ambiguous information in ways that align with our hopes. It's like wearing rose-colored glasses. We naturally filter information to support what we want to believe. Leaders who understand this can craft messages that different constituents interpret according to their own preferences.
There is no
Consider how
reason to be
corporate
afraid of my
communications
magic.
often work.
Unless you
Losses
give me
become
one.
strategic investments, while modest achievements are framed as breakthrough successes. Research from the University of Michigan shows
30
that
seconds
leaders
before you
who
attack.
frame
Get
company
ready.
challenges positively often boost employee morale and productivity by 31%, even when the situation is objectively difficult. Machiavelli captured this dynamic perfectly when he observed that in the actions of all men, especially of princes, where there is no court to appeal to, one looks to the end.
The
So
battle
let a
starts in
prince
5,
win and maintain
4,
his state.
3,
The means will
2,
always be judged
1.
honorable and will be
All you
praised
need
by
to do is
everyone.
capture the mission area.
But
Got
not
it?
all organizations operate this way.
Y'all a bunch of deadbeats.
Patagonia,
I can
under
do this
founder Yvon
myself.
Chouinard's leadership, built its brand on radical transparency, openly acknowledging the environmental impact of its products, actively discouraging unnecessary consumption with campaigns like "Don't buy this gas." This attitude of honesty didn't hurt the company. It strengthened customer loyalty and built an authentic brand identity that
The
competitors
mission area
struggled
is
to
yours
match.
to capture now.
In fact, during this period of radical transparency,
This spot gives me a
Patagonia's revenue
strange
grew from
feeling.
$295 million
Don't mess with the amazing Spider-Man!
Customer loyalty metrics exceeded industry standards by 38%.
Capture the mission
The
area.
most dangerous deception isn't what leaders tell their followers, but what they tell themselves. 2023 study from organizations that review human decision processes found that power increases self-deception by 40%. Leaders become increasingly convinced of their own narratives, when evidence contradicts them. This creates a disturbing feedback loop where leaders who believe their own myths become more convincing to others, which reinforces
Tremble before fast!
self-deception. First method for estimating the intelligence of a ruler is to look at the men he has around him. Machiavelli's insight here reveals something surprising. Truly intelligent leaders surround themselves with other intelligent people, while insecure leaders surround themselves with fools. But this creates a paradox in leadership selection. Leaders who appear intellectually simple may sometimes gain advantages that more thoughtful leaders cannot.
Judge! Jury! Executioner!
The idea that voters often prefer candidates they enjoy having a beer with over those who appear too intellectual or complex. This isn't just anecdotal, it's grounded in psychology. Social scientists call it the phenomenon where highly competent individuals who show minor weaknesses or simplicity become more relatable and likable than those who appear flawless or intellectual. When you think about leaders who've risen rapidly in the field, are they the most thoughtful, nuanced thinkers? Or those who offer simple, decisive answers with unwavering confidence? You notice how we often mistake simplicity for clarity? George W. Bush's folksy communication style during his presidency provides an interesting example. Despite graduating from Yale and Harvard Business School, he delivered a simple communication style that connected with many voters who might have found a more intellectual presentation alienating. The psychology behind this phenomenon is clear. Humans have an innate discomfort with ambiguity and complexity. We crave certainty, even when certainty isn't possible. Leaders who offer simple narratives and clear answers tap into this psychological need, even when complex problems demand nuanced solutions.
Let's do this!
A Stanford study of 952 CEOs found that leaders who communicated
Jury! Executioner!
higher initial compensation rates. However, they were also 31% more likely to underperform in complex business environments where nuanced thinking is required.
Don't mess with the amazing Spider-Man!
Ought to have no other aim or thought,
captured more than
nor
half of the
select
mission
anything
area.
else for his
Keep
study
going.
than war and its rules and discipline. For this is the sole art that belongs to him who rules. This isn't just about military matters. It's about focusing on what appears most practical and straightforward,
Quantum magic.
rather than abstract or theoretical considerations. Those most capable of navigating the actual complexities of leadership are often least likely
Tremble before fast!
decisions, because their acknowledgement of complexity makes them appear less decisive and confident than their simpler competitors. It's better to be feared than loved, not be both. This famous Machiavellian quote captures a profound paradox about leadership psychology.
You'll have to keep
Empathy
fighting
and
until we have
traditional
a winner.
virtues, while morally
I've
admirable,
watched
can
entire
sometimes become
realities
strategical
consumed by
liabilities
chaos.
in leadership
I won't let
contexts.
that happen again.
Machiavelli wasn't suggesting leaders should be cruel, he explicitly warned against behaviors that generate hatred. Rather, he was acknowledging that excessive empathy can prevent leaders from making necessary but difficult decisions.
That's better.
Modern psychological research supports this observation. A study in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology found that individuals in positions of power showed reduced neural activity, empathy mechanism, when observing others in distress.
This is real firepower!
Might be an adaptation that helps people make difficult leadership decisions.
Don't mess with the amazing Spider-Man!
To a certain extent, the surgeon felt the full emotional impact, cutting into another vehicle
Embrace the
and
case.
being able to perform
Let's keep
life-saving
fighting until we have a winner.
Similarly, leaders often need to make decisions that cause short-term pain or long-term gain. Those who feel other pain too acutely may hesitate when decisive action is needed. This means that difficult decisions need to be made to necessary action. This creates a troubling dynamic in leadership selection.
Control lost.
People with naturally lower empathy, including those with narcissistic traits, may find it easier to project the decisiveness and emotional stability we associate with leadership. A University of California study found that individuals scoring higher on narcissism measures were 35% more likely to be selected as group leaders in experimental
Well,
settings.
you can't expect to win them all.
Machiavelli recognized this when he wrote, "Men are so simple and so ready to obey present necessities that one who deceives will always find those who allow themselves to be deceived." Leaders with a reduced empathy are often more willing to use deception because they're less troubled by its effects on others. This connects directly to how virtues function in leadership contexts. Machiavelli observed, "Thus, it is well to seem merciful, faithful, humane, religious, upright, and to be so, but with a mind so framed that should you require not to be so, you may be able and know how to change to the opposite." This counterintuitive insight highlights
Pick
one of
your
the
hero.
strangest paradoxes
Or
in
villain.
leadership
I'm not
psychology.
judging.
You don't have to be a
Sometimes
witch to
traditional
find the
virtues
magic
like
in this
honesty,
world. But it
humility,
does help.
and kindness can produce worse outcomes than their opposites. This isn't because virtues are bad, but because their effectiveness depends entirely on context. Consider how former German Chancellor Angela Merkel navigated the European refugee crisis. Her decision to accept over 1 million refugees in 2015 required balancing humanitarian empathy with pragmatic concerns about integration and public
Magneto
opinion.
raised me to never stop
Had
fighting
she
for
been
what
either
I
purely
believe is
empathetic
right.
or entirely pragmatic, the outcome would likely have been worse for all
30
involved.
seconds before you attack.
The
Get
wisdom
ready.
lay in knowing when to lead with compassion and when to impose practical limits. There are alternatives to this cynical view. The servant leadership model, developed by Robert Greenleaf in the
This looks like a
1970s,
gig for the
suggests
Guardians of the
that leaders
Galaxy.
who prioritize their followers' needs over their own ambitions often produce better long-term
The
organizational
battle
outcomes.
starts in 5,
Costco
4,
provides a compelling
3,
example.
2,
Under
1.
CEO Jim Senegal's
All you need to
leadership,
do is capture the mission
Costco
area.
paid wages
Got it?
40% above industry average and provided healthcare to 85% of employees when competitors covered only 47%. The results speak for themselves. Costco's employee turnover is just 17% compared to the 44% industry average. And during Senegal's tenure, Costco stock outperformed Walmart by 300%. The real challenge isn't choosing between virtue and effectiveness,
Looks like the
but
mission area
developing the
is
wisdom
yours
to
to
know
capture
which
now.
virtues serve the greater good in each specific context. As Aristotle, whom Machiavelli had surely read, argues, virtue isn't about following rigid rules, but applying principles appropriately to each unique situation.
Ah, that's better.
For there is such a difference between how one lives and how one ought to live, that he who abandons what is done for what ought to be done learns his ruin, rather than his preservation. This observation from Machiavelli captures the fundamental problem with leadership selection. The attributes that help someone win a leadership competition are often different from, and sometimes opposed to, the attributes that make for effective leadership one
A
selected.
nice deep freeze.
Think of it like casting an actor to play a doctor in a movie versus hiring an actual doctor for a hospital. The actor who looks most like our mental image of a doctor, tall, authoritative, with perfect hair and teeth, might win the movie role, but would be useless in an operating room. Similarly, candidates who perform leadership most convincingly often win leadership positions are those who exercise leadership most effectively. How often have you seen the most qualified person lose out to the most impressive performer? Modern research confirms this pattern. Studies show that individuals with narcissistic traits are more likely to emerge as leaders in group settings. But these same traits often lead to poor leadership outcomes once in position. This creates what researchers call the leadership paradox. The attributes that help someone rise to power can make them poor stewards of that Studies suggest that humans evolved to be sensitive to signals of dominance and confidence when selecting leaders, particularly in threatening environments. This made sense in ancestral contexts where physical protection was a primary concern, but creates problems in modern organizational settings where collaboration and innovation matter more than dominance. Research from the University of California shows that our leadership selection criteria remain remarkably similar to those used by chimpanzees.
I am ready
We
to put on a
instinctively
show.
prefer individuals who display confidence, intelligence, vocal power, and social dominance. These traits have minimal correlation with effective modern leadership capabilities. Machiavelli recognized this fundamental tension when he wrote, "People are the masses, the nobility of a leadership class who wish to rule. People have one simple desire, not to be dominated or oppressed by the powerful. The nobility merely want to dominate and oppress the people.
Fury's almost yours.
This creates a troubling cycle.
Goodbye.
Our leadership selection systems are the systematics the wrong types of people for leadership roles. Those most eager to lead are often those least suited to do so wisely, while those who would lead most effectively are often reluctant to pursue power. Consider Nelson Mandela, who became South Africa's president not through power-seeking, but through moral authority earned during 27 years of imprisonment. His leadership approach, emphasizing reconciliation over retribution, demonstrates that leaders who don't
God of
can create transformational change. Similarly, Abraham Lincoln was initially dismissed as awkward and unpolished, yet his thoughtful, empathetic leadership style proved uniquely suited to navigate America through its greatest crisis. These exceptions to the pattern suggest that while our default leadership selection
Chaos
systems may
surrounds
favor
us, but I
narcissists
will
and
gladly
manipulators,
show it to his
alternative
in
approaches
control.
are possible. Therefore, it is unnecessary for a prince to have all the good qualities I have
30 seconds
enumerated,
before you attack.
but it is
Get
very
ready.
necessary to appear to have them. This famously cynical observation captures Machiavelli's pragmatic approach to
Don't you say
leadership
it.
ethics. But it would be a mistake to read him as simply advocating deception. Rather, Machiavelli was acknowledging the psychological reality that perception often matters more than reality in leadership contexts,
The battle starts
challenging
in
us
5,
to design better
4,
systems.
3.
If appearance
2,
often trumps a
1.
reality in leadership selection,
All you need to do
how
is
can we
capture the
ensure
mission
that our
area.
leaders
Got it?
actually possess the qualities needed for effective leadership? The answer may lie in redesigning our selection systems to account for these psychological biases. Some ancient societies used fascinating approaches to this problem. The Venetian Republic used an elaborate system mixing election and random selection to choose its doge leader, partly to prevent any faction from capturing power. Other societies required leaders to periodically relinquish control, preventing the psychological corruption that comes with extended power. Modern organizations are experimenting with similar innovations. Bridgewater Associates, the world's largest hedge
Crawl
fund,
back to your domain,
implements what
Helen.
founder Ray Dalio calls radical transparency, a system where employees at all levels can critique leadership decisions, and where even the CEO's performance is regularly evaluated through anonymous feedback. The This approach helps prevent echo chambers that typically reinforce narcissistic leadership styles. Drawn from both Machiavellian wisdom and to protect themselves from manipulating leadership. First, they should prioritize actual outcomes over interview performance. Studies show that past behavior is a necessary for future actions that have led someone to Next, instead of giving leaders permanent positions right away, there should be mandatory trial periods. During these periods, feedback should be gathered from all levels, but serving as a 360-degree review before making any long-term commitments. Another important safeguard is to separate the power to propose actions from the power to approve them. When one person holds both, it creates a dangerous concentration of influence and opens the door to unchecked manipulation. To prevent groupthink and ensure critical decisions are well tested, organizations should also assign someone the formal role of devil's advocate. Their job is to challenge assumptions and question the leader, and make sure alternative perspectives are heard. And finally, implementing term limits and rotating leadership positions can help counteract the psychological decay that comes from holding onto power for too long. Power, left unchecked, tends to
I
corrupt,
want goodbye.
and that's something Machiavelli understood better than most. Perhaps most importantly, Machiavelli's insights suggest we should focus less on individual leaders and more on institutional constraints. As he wrote, "A prince, therefore, being compelled knowingly to adopt the beast, ought to choose the fox and the lion, because the lion cannot defend himself against snares, and the fox cannot defend himself against wolves. Therefore, it is necessary to be a fox to discover the snares, and the lion to terrify the wolves." The fox represents strategic wisdom, the ability to detect deception and navigate complex social environments. The lion represents moral courage, the willingness to stand firm on ethical principles despite opposition. But perhaps the most important insight isn't about individual leaders at all, but about creating systems where even flawed leaders can
You'll need a
produce good
top-notch
outcomes.
team to win this one.
What systems have you encountered that effectively prevent the worst leadership abuses? James Madison,
We don't
one of
have to be
America's
a
founding
witch to find
fathers,
the magic
understood
in this
this
world.
Machiavellian
But it
principle
does
in
help.
designing the U.S. Constitution. "If men were angels," he wrote, "no government would be necessary." Instead of seeking perfect leaders, Madison created a system of checks and balances designed to function even with imperfect, self-interested leaders. A truly Machiavellian solution in the best sense.
Unlike some X-Men,
Modern research in organizational psychology suggests that leadership effectiveness depends more on context than on individual
30
leaders.
seconds before you attack.
The same
Get
person
ready.
who thrives in one leadership role may fail in another, not because their character changes, but because different contexts reward different attributes. This suggests we should focus less on finding perfect leaders and more on creating systems that bring out the best in the leaders we've had. We've explored why leadership so often rewards narcissists, liars, and
2,
fools.
1.
Not because these qualities make for good leadership, but because they provide advantages in
it sure looks
leadership
like a
selection
portal.
processes. We've seen how Machiavelli's insights from Renaissance Italy align remarkably well with modern
all they
psychological
did was
research
make
on
me
power,
angrier.
perception, and leadership dynamics.
I
But
suppose
we've
that
also
helps.
discovered exceptions to these patterns and potential solutions. The uncomfortable truth is that our leadership selection systems, whether in politics, business, or other domains, often select for the wrong traits. We reward confidence over competence, charisma over character, and decisive simplicity over thoughtful complexity. This happens not because we consciously prefer poor leaders, but because our psychological biases make us vulnerable to certain forms of influence and impressionism. Machiavelli wasn't that the world rewards vice over virtue, but that effective leadership requires understanding human psychology as it is, not as we wish it to be. Many have imagined republics and principalities
have
that have
my
never been
revenge
seen
for
or
that.
known to exist in reality. For how we live is so far removed from how we ought to live. that he who abandons what is done for what ought to be done will rather learn to bring about his own ruin than his preservation. These dynamics, first step in changing, we can implement some processes that emphasize track records over performances. Past behavior predicts future behavior more reliably than interviews or debates, which reward theatrical skills over leadership capacity.
We are undefeatable!
Institutional safeguards that limit the damage narcissistic leaders can cause. Term limits, power sharing arrangements, and strong accountability mechanisms protect organizations even when flawed leaders emerge. Finally, we can educate ourselves about psychological patterns. By understanding how narcissism, strategic deception, and false simplicity influence our perception of leadership, we become less susceptible to their appeal. We can learn to distinguish emotion between strategic communication and manipulative deception, between excessive simplicity and intellectual laziness. Truly Machiavellian leader in the best sense of the term, sees through the games of power while employing a moral compass that points toward genuine human chaos. And the truly Machiavellian citizen will understand
Maximum halt!
leaders and the serve their own good rather than what aspects of leadership selection have you seen backfire in your own experience? Have you ever encountered a leader who goes to power without falling into these darker patterns?
If we survive
I'd
this
genuinely love to
You're
hear your
halfway
thoughts.
there. Keep
Drop them
going.
in the comments below. And if this resonated with you, or if you know someone whose position or perspective could really benefit from hearing this, consider sharing it with them. Sometimes the right insight at the right moment can shift how someone sees it. If you found value in this exploration of leadership psychology, don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into the hidden patterns that shape our world. Until next time, remember, in a world that rewards princes, be wise enough to see through the con.
This queen's reign isn't over.
Of course, that saw the lefty media lose it en masse. Apparently, white farmers being targeted, being killed, having their land taken without compensation.
I was fine. This ain't
In his meeting with President Ramaphosa, Trump peddled unsubstantiated claims of genocide in South Africa.
Don't mess with the amazing Spider-Man!
have my revenge for
In
that.
South Africa. It is a fringe conspiracy theory.
Conspiracy theory. What, like the
Friends,
virus?
gather around. We are
Maximum
undefeatable!
halt!
Cognitive decline. Yes, it's just a
Almost
another
there. Don't turn back
conspiracy
now.
theory. Let's check in on the sort of scenes and witness in the
Chin
South
up.
I suppose that helps.
Us against the world!
This queen's reign isn't over.
Kill kill the boa, kill the farmer.
Get that vehicle moving again! Beware, an enemy!
Now, this
As if I wasn't strong enough.
Marco Rubio's Senate committee hearing to rationale totally insane
All they did was make me angrier.
Human Torch in the house, yo!
Only 60 seconds left!
exchange between Senator Tim Kaine and Secretary of State Marco Rubio earlier in the week about the few dozen South African farmers.
This
wrapped
queen's
in
reign
violence in the
isn't
US.
over.
This is
Down
really
to 30
upset many on
seconds.
the left.
Get that vehicle moving again!
Have a different standard based upon the color of somebody's skin.
Time for the big finish!
Maximum pulse!
Come on, Loki. I'm not falling for that.
Final 10 seconds! How you frozen?
Well, you've demonstrated enough because you think anyone should be allowed into this country for any reason.